Welcome, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, dear collectors, dear industry friends, welcome to the 56th edition of INHORGENTA. More than half a century of bringing together craftsmanship, commerce, and culture. Today we are not just talking about watches, we're talking about the transformation of watch collecting. The title of this session, as you are reading around, is Heritage Meets Hype, the new era of watch collecting, which I think is hanging it quite high, but we are aiming high. So let's look back a little bit. Over the last or past decade, social media has definitely reshaped desire. Secondary markets have reshaped value, and independent brands have reshaped prestige. And collectors, I would say they have reshaped power. We have moved from waiting list to WhatsApp groups, from boutique exclusivity to global digital tribes. So today we ask, how has the collector mindset actually evolved? And what can the industry, which is here, actually learn from it? I'm very much delighted to be joined by two voices that shaped, I would say, global watch discourse in their very own way. On one hand, Andy Hoffman from Hodinkee from the United States, a warm welcome. And on the other hand, on the other side, Tom Exton from UK, I would say for the last 20 years, a watch collector, true watch collector.
Yeah, correct. Hello.
My name is Jörn Kengelbach from Swisswatches magazine. I'm happy to host this next 30 minutes. So, gentlemen, welcome. Let's dive into it. Oh yeah, you get a word to say hello.
Happy to be here, Joern.
Thank you, Andy. And let us start, Andy. Who is your Hodinkee core audience today, and how has it actually changed over the past decade?
It's a very good question. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. This is my first time at INHORGENTA, and it's an excellent show. The collector and our audience at Hodinkee is obviously an English language speaking and reading audience, but it's a global audience, but still centered certainly in the United States. Who is the typical Hodinkee reader? Well, they are somebody who's passionate and enthusiastic about watches. They may be somebody who's been collecting watches as long as Tom has for 20 years, 30 years, or they may be somebody who is new to the space and new to the hobby. And at Hodinkee, we sort of provide a specialized, outsider, but accessible insight into watches and into collecting. And I think, the collector, the voice and the power of the collector has changed quite a bit over the time that Hodinkee has been around, almost 20 years. And, the collector has, because of the internet and because of publications like ours and others, and because of content that people like Tom make, they are much more educated, they are much more specific, they are much more certain and curious about what they're interested in watches. And so they come with a well-curated and understanding of watches already when they come to us and they want more.
Thank you so much, Andy. Maybe the question comes to you. You were saying before about 20 years into watch collecting, but especially in the last decade, what would you say, like in the last 10 years, what has really changed what you see outside there in the collector scene?
Very definitely there's been a shift, certainly in my collecting habits and that of my audience as well. Certainly the past 10 years has definitely been really formative. In the early days, I was really into the major brands. As social media has developed, as the education has developed, as more and more people are putting out amazing content creators, and also platforms like Hodinkee, everyone knows everything now. And there's not just a few people going down the rabbit hole of niche watches and independent brands and craftsmanship and, hairsprings and all this kind of stuff that you'd previously wasn't really accessible to people. It's changed massively. So my collecting journey is now I'm massively into independent brands. Every time I buy a new watch, it has to add something to the collection. It has to be a new material, it has to be a new brand, it has to be a new complication, a new case shape. Something has to be brought to the table, otherwise I don't want it. Whereas 10 years ago, maybe I just wanted 10 steel sports integrated, blah, blah, whatever it is, insert generic, sports watch names. So yeah, I think it's changed massively. And my audience are now hungry for something that other people don't have. They're hungry for an experience. They maybe want to be involved in the production process or see it being made. Whereas 10 years ago, potentially, there were still people that cared, but most people were just happy to go to a boutique, get a glass of bubbly, get their watch and go home. So I think it's changed massively.
Yes, and I only can agree. From Swisswatches side, we are based in Germany, looking at international collectors. We've seen also a dramatic shift, especially, I would say, if you're looking at the time during and after COVID. I think COVID was the peak of hunting for those pieces you were mentioning, for this big names, and they rose they skyrocketed price-wise. And then you saw the reality, which was hard for a lot of brands and is still hard, and brands are kind of suffering. But on the other hand, it kind of crystallizes now that there's the kind of real collector is somebody who's hunting for something else. We now have also huge collections out there, which may have been always there, but now they become more visible and people are more willing to speak about it. They were more hidden, especially in Germany, where people not show off so much. Now we see massive collectors in Germany and I think in every other country. And my next question would be also do you see different mentalities over Europe, Asia and the US? And what kind of differences would you see, Andy?
I think there are certain universal truths in where collectors are. And Tom certainly sort of, hit it nail on the head. Everything has changed in that. I think, a few years ago, COVID era, pre-COVID, people were focused on the big brands, the big names, and looking for those certain references. The amount of people interested in the space and in the hobby completely changed with COVID. We have to acknowledge that this event, just like it will change the course of history, obviously, economically and socially, for decades to come, this is the critical event in watch collecting in recent history. So what has come out of that? There's been a shakeout of that. Many people who came into the space as speculators looking to make a quick buck, which certainly was an opportunity at the time, that has gone away. We've seen prices for on the secondary market correct from record levels. And collectors are looking for a different experience now in a lot of cases. They are looking for a personalized experience. They are looking perhaps, when we're talking in the high end, they want to know the watchmaker, or they want to have some kind of interaction with that company, and they want to see how their watch is being made. And so that's a huge shift in the mentality of the collector. Now, this isn't the case for everyone. There are lots of people who are still very much focused on the big names, Patek, Rolex, AP, etc. But indeed, and geographically, sure, there are differences. Asia, China in particular, has been a place in recent years with it's a lot of money to spend. Obviously, economically, China is struggling a bit right now, going through what is a bit of a real estate-driven economic crisis. But from what we see right now, that the worst of that may be over. So I think we will continue to see that area of the world play a major role. Europe is remains the sort of center of watch collecting, or educated watch collecting. Italy, obviously, Tom from the UK. There's a long history of collecting watches in these places. Germany as well, obviously. The US, there's been long-term collectors in the U.S. for a long time, but this is where the growth is, and this is where we're seeing a lot of new people come into the space, whether they came during the COVID era or not. A lot of them have stuck around, and it is a younger, enthusiastic collecting group, and they're hungry and they're willing to spend.
Tom, I want to reflect that with you. So what do you value most right now, and what frustrates you most with brands you are interacting as a collector?
I have to be pretty careful. I think I am a bit bored of the big brand experience and the game playing and the usual stuff. If you want a hype watch, you maybe have to buy some tat that you don't want. I collect cars as well, and it's completely parallel. If you go to any of the big brands or any of the hype cars, of which there are actually very few of those left now, you have to buy some tat that you don't want. And there's nothing luxurious about feeling cajoled into buying something that you don't want to get something that you do want. That doesn't feel like a luxury experience for me. So I'm a bit bored of that. I don't mind waiting for things. I don't mind doing deposits and stage payments and waiting for things to be built and blah, blah. But yeah, the big brand experience, and I think COVID was a perfect storm. You had a load of cheap money flying around. You had a lot of people sat at home pretending to work from home with lots of time on the internet. You had lots of people that saw asset prices going absolutely crazy, not just watches, cars, everything basically. And they got it sucked in the speculators, to your point earlier. And that drove waiting lists through the roof. And I feel that the collectors that were into watches before the COVID period, they got even more frustrated. It was bad enough before COVID, but you didn't have a hope in hell of getting anything you're interested in. So those people were shoveled over to, what else have we got? So you saw brands like Girard-Perregaux with their Laureato. They very definitely started benefiting from that kind of shift of people that the original collectors thinking, what else can I get?
There's no better example than that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the canary in the coal mine, really. You see the Laureato going absolutely crazy because collectors were thinking, well, what else can I get for my money? And actually, you can get a huge amount for your money if you just look around. So, and I think a lot of those people are still around. The original collectors before COVID, they're still there, but they've now kind of gone away from the main brands, and they're now in the sphere of independence, not just the kind of micro brands, but the brands like GP, for example.
Yeah.
And they're still around. And they're all down the rabbit hole now, searching for different movements and manufacturers. You
were mentioning cars. I don't know cars too much, but I find it interesting that frustration it can still be part of a business model, because it sounds so weird in luxury. And I don't know how long that will work. I mean,
it's a fine line between frustration and desirability and scarcity, right?
That's the point.
Collecting is all about scarcity and one of one and having something that someone else doesn't have. And I think, the recent trends and recent history of the industry tells us that this can certainly be done with lower volumes. I mean, we talk about independence. I mean, look at what has changed in terms of the market and the perception for a brand like FP Joern, which is, we've seen values for that brand, which makes about 900 mechanical watches a year, continuing to increase. At the same time, Rolex is doing just fine, and they make over 1 million watches a year. They dominate the industry, and yet at the same time, they seem to be able to manage that scarcity versus frustration. Although, to be fair, there is certainly the idea of customers being frustrated and not being able to acquire the timepieces that they want when they have the money.
We don't have one here. I can see his Daytona here. You're going to have to teach me the secrets, how you manage that.
After the talk.
But it's a great.
Yeah.
That is the most connected people that I know in Geneva cannot just walk into Chronotime owned by Rolex and ask for a Daytona and get one. It is still an extremely difficult watch.
It brings me to a question, because to end frustration, I have the feeling that the whole CPO, certified pre-owned business, feels like that it should ease the frustration, because for a higher price you can now enter or buy watches that were pre-owned, and that also make it possible for people to acquire them. Would that be something you would consider? Did you ever buy a CPO watch?
There's something fundamentally off for me about walking into a Rolex boutique, walking past a Daytona at 13,000, whatever they are retail, probably 15, 20,000 today, 25 tomorrow, whatever they're doing. Walking past that watch to the CPO program and buying a used one for what, 10,000 more? I don't keep up with values anymore.
Yeah.
But I get it. You know, you are catering to someone that can just walk in and buy one, but it wouldn't feel right for me at all. It still doesn't feel like a luxurious experience. Just because you haven't WhatsApped the manager enough, or gone in for enough coffees, or, WhatsApp them, how are your kids, or how are your dogs? You know, all the stuff that ends up getting you a watch eventually, all that small talk and all that fluff that you effectively have to do.
But let's also not only look at the big name, because we have Richard Mille doing CPO. We have different niche brands. Even Uhrwerk is doing CPO. So even those who are producing less than 1,000 watches a year are saying, okay, we want to deliver watches to customers who otherwise would also wait for years, you know?
No, I mean, any brand that isn't considering or even or looking at CPO is probably not doing their homework right now. I mean, vintage or secondhand pre-owned watches, this is a massive part of the market. I've seen some estimates. This is $17 billion market. The primary market for Swiss watches is about $50 billion. And Rolex, which has only been in CPO really since the late 2022, I guess, is when they started. That's a $500 million business right now. It is for a retailer like Watches of Switzerland, which owns Hodinkee. It is their second biggest brand, with Rolex being the biggest brand. And we are seeing, and as you say, we see brands like Uhrwerk or MB&F having a role in the secondary market for your timepieces is critical for any brand to have influence and power and control over brand equity, brand perception, and obviously, price is part of that. We're going to see Audemars Piguet come into CPO in their own way, probably this year, and that is, a brand acknowledging that CPO, secondary market, is a legitimate and critical part of the market. So there's going to be more CPO, and there's lots of people, who are not as collectors, who are not as, I guess, as can't spend as much time on watches as people like we do. And there is comfort and security in buying CPO through a known retailer, and indeed you do build up your spend with that retailer through CPO as well. It's a big part of the business.
I agree, and I have the feeling that it's a different group of buyers, and that's what I experienced. That those people actually, they have, for example, their dream watch. They have their anniversary date. They want the watch from their birth year and something, and they want to buy it. They have the money. There's so many people out that are not. I was talking to George Kern for Swisswatches. He was saying, what are we talking in watch collecting? I mean, 85% of the people out there will maybe buy 5 watches over the lifespan, and 3 of them are Rolex. and the other is like, okay, I want this dream watch, and I want it now because it's now the time. And on the other hand, I find it interesting, and I wanted to ask you, what triggers you? Because you were talking about experiences with the CEO. We were talking about MB&F, having a tribe, traveling with those collectors to funny places over the world. Is that something, is experiences with the brand, getting to know the CEO, is that really key for you to acquire a valuable watch?
I'm getting old and grumpy, so I'm not really interested in the social side of it. But very definitely, like meeting the maker, I'm interested in what that person that's made that watch, what did they do before? Where did they work? Did they create something? You know, I'm interested in the nerdy backstory. I like some provenance. And yeah, that's important to me. And the trigger now, as I said earlier, it's every watch I buy, it's got to be something, there's got to be something brought to the table. So for example, on my wrist here, this is a Ludovic Ballois. I don't know if you've ever met the bloke. Fantastic chap. He's about 18 feet tall. But he's a brilliant bloke. He's got a very small atelier just outside Geneva. And he's got an incredible life story. The brands that he's worked for, he's been at Joern, Frank Muller, he co-developed the Crazy Hours, all this kind of stuff in the background. And I was reading up on the guy for a long time before I then saved a search alert on all these used platforms for the watch to come up. So that's where I am now. But would I have done that 10 years ago? No. I would have just got them for whatever shiny thing I probably saw in a magazine advert or something. So the trigger points now are very, very different, and they're a bit nuanced, and it's kind of case-by-case basis.
Let's look back maybe those 20 years, because maybe there's some people in the audience who might have the question, who are the names that it started with to change the industry? The big names, of course, they started back in the 80s, 90s to re-establish mechanical watchmaking. But there were names you were mentioning already. Maybe we can look back and what you would say are the key players in the more independent watchmaking that actually infused it. I remember back then, for example, Richard Mille, which took a completely different way than a lot of different watchmakers, but is now one of the most valuable brands out there. I still remember the days when they were actually for sale, and Richard was like an AP person who worked at AP, who was done very high-end watches, and then changed and had the vision that there is a market for the ultra luxury watch, which was not there at that time. But there were different players and different approaches, and maybe Andy, you can name some brands that really started for you the game that we are playing now today with the collectors.
Well, I think Richard Mille is the sort of perfect example. I mean, that's $1 billion or it's part of the billionaires club in terms of annual revenue. And it's an extraordinary story, and it's a short-term story. I mean, that brand is 20 years old?
25,
and, 25 years old, and sort of tapped in to a segment of the market that was lacking. And look, the watch isn't for everyone, but it identified, and through great watchmaking, but also sort of brand positioning and marketing, tapped into that space. I mean, obviously on the independent side, as I mentioned, FP Joern, the market is, FP Joern has been doing what he's been doing for a long time. The market came around to appreciate and value his products, and in his wake, we see people like Recep Rexhepi and Simon Brett. What Max Busser has done with MBNF, also giving watchmakers a platform and creating products, with his design vision in mind, but also that are sort of casting a spotlight on the mechanics, on the watchmakers themselves. I mean, the market has come around, has become educated enough to start to really appreciate those brands and those watchmakers. And indeed, it's a different experience with those brands because the volumes are so low. I mean, what does Richard Mille make? Maybe 5,000, 6,000 watches a year? Yeah, I mean, talk about scarcity, talk about having something exclusive. This is that, and so we are seeing the rise of those, name brand young watchmakers come up, and that's because of brands like this.
Tom, can you remember when you had the first kind of independent watchmaking experience where you said, you stopped and had this moment of, I need to talk to this company, or I want to see the watches? Or was there a specific moment, or did it evolve?
I have a couple of pretty unglamorous stories regarding my first forays into independent watchmaking. My first one was I found a FP Joern Elegant, the quartz thingy that's now, for some reason, there isn't a cheaper one in the UK, less than £100,000.
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic watch. But is it £100,000 worth of watch? No, I don't think so. Some people do. I'm obviously wrong because that's the market price. But I bought one for £9,000 in 2019 from a very small grey market dealer. I met him in a petrol station. Beaconsfield Services in the UK, great service station. And I remember thinking, what have I just done? I've just spent £9,000 on something with a battery in it. And I bought it because I loved it and I wore it everywhere. And I thought, this is feels like a toy. It's fantastic. It's a bit expensive what it is, but we'll go with it. I love it. But now, fast forward, where the market is, I'm not saying I'm a visionary, by the way. That was just, monkeys at typewriters, every now and again you do something that ends up being right. And then the second one, about 6 months later, I bought a Laurent Ferrier Grand Sport Tourbillon. The first one, the anniversary of their double spiral tourbillon, their first sports watch, the anniversary of Laurent Ferrier being in Le Mans. Quite an important watch, but that watch launched on the market for about 160,000 Swiss, I think it was, and they couldn't sell them. They made 12 of them. I think 2 went to friends and family, and then they just floated around on the kind of I don't know, they kind of get past and they go for cents on the dollar around the place. And I think I bought that watch with my COVID loan. In the UK, we all got loans from the government and there's free money flying around. It's even more unglamorous than my first story.
You were clearly part of the problem with the market.
I 100% am part of many, many problems, but particularly in the watch world, yeah. So I just bought it and I thought, brilliant, I love it. And yeah, I don't even know what point I was trying to make with that, other than those are my first 2 kind of heavy independent buys, but they were just passion-led, really. I thought they seemed interesting, very wearable, and not a lot of people knew what they were. And actually, at that time as well, it's still a key criteria. They're London safe. Maybe the Joern isn't now because it's all over Instagram, but it's always a key criteria living in London, having a nice watch that collectors know about, but people that ride mopeds that carry knives on them don't know about. So it's
that is an interesting element to the in certain parts of the world, wearing a Rolex or even a Patek or an AP or something.
Yeah, you guys go steady in London. Keep those sleeves long.
No.
Otherwise, you lose them.
Yeah, you'll have one hand.
Yeah.
It is an interesting observation for sure, and I think, indeed, certainly, obviously, the market has moved away from those sports watches to shaped watches, more jewelry focused watches, just more interesting watches. I should have mentioned Sylvain Bruneron as someone who, I think 5-6 years ago, when I guess Sylvain was probably working at Breitling at the time, the likelihood of success for a shaped watch like the Mirage probably wasn't as high. But look, he's one of the hottest things on the independent scene all of a sudden. And indeed, the collector market has shifted, and they are looking for that more individual, expressionistic piece.
And I think we've got COVID, obviously appalling, but I think we've got a lot to thank it for in the watch world. It created that backfill, and it created that customer base that wouldn't have probably taken the plunge because of all the secondary market values going up. That has created a backfill and supported the secondary market prices on all these hot indie brands, and meant that they can then spend money developing new watches. And there's a whole raft of brands that probably would not be here if it wasn't for that. If you'd bought, for example, that Laurent Ferrier brand new, you would have lost 100,000 on it. And there's not many collectors out there that could or would afford to do that.
Right.
And what COVID's done has meant that, there are so many brands. We've got Théo Offray, we've got David Kando, loads of amazing brands now that have got a customer base. The people that are happy to put down deposits, and, it's just seen as the norm now. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of positives that come
So
from it.
are you basically saying, because I was thinking about, is the hype not also like a long-term risk for brands? So we have seen hype brands like 15 years ago, I remember it was Hublot was a hype brand, you know, like everybody wanted to talk about. Beaver was out there. He was like the guru and the crown prince of the whole industry. And we have seen Panerai rising from the late 90s to the 2000s. And those brands have had a hard time now because maybe they wanted to grow too fast. But on the other hand, it felt like, okay, everybody has it on the wrist. Everybody who drove a sports car needed a Hublot, or everybody was a soccer player needed a Hublot. And now we have seen those shifts in those brands. And now we see, as you were just mentioning, FP Joern skyrocketing prices. But isn't that a danger for those collectors and brands, or is that actually necessary? Do we need those hypes and drops?
I think if they are, Joern will be fine because they're not making thousands and thousands of watches. I think they're quite safe, and the demand is always going to outstrip supply.
Yeah.
The Hublots of the world, they're massive businesses. They need to churn thousands and thousands of watches. Otherwise, they don't keep the lights on. They don't pay their hundreds or thousands of staff. And they're limited edition after limited edition, and there ends up being a saturation point. Now, I love Hublot. I don't have an issue with it whatsoever. I was a massive Panaristi guy on the forums back in the day. I still love Panerai. But if you combine the massive companies with the need to churn, and even changing trends, you know, watches getting smaller, sometimes just the rise and fall of trends, you know, things do get left beach. So Panerai were a big sufferer of that with their 47 mils. But they're coming back.
That's true.
They're coming back, Panerai. So, you know, I think the limited edition thing and the overproduction, I think that's a big killer for brands. But some it's a necessary evil. It's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I mean, you do bring up sort of two classic examples of brands that were, you know, once on the top of collectors' list with Hublot and Panerai, and still lots of my banker friends own their Panerais from the early 2000s, and they still wear them. And I think, you know, I would say watch that space, because obviously there are efforts both at Hublot and Panerai to sort of, you know, revive those brands and bring them back to the place in collectors' minds that they once were. It's not an easy job, and I think that indeed sort of, you know, trends and interest in education sort of pushed people in different places. But you can look within Richemont, which owns both those brands, LVMH owns Hublot, but look within brands that are within the big groups. Look at Vacheron Constantin, which has had an excellent run in the COVID and post-COVID era, as a, you know, pretty big brand, and one that shows that under that structure they can continue to produce interesting and desirable pieces for collectors. Lange Langenzonen obviously sort of kept production the same, but, you know, remains within the Richemont group and is still certainly a highly desirable and collectible piece. So it can work and it can be done, but it's not easy with all the choice that collectors have now.
Maybe let us look a little bit more at the watches in detail, and let us look at the two, I would say, like sides on the string. That is, on one hand, the design, on one hand, on the other hand, the movement. And maybe the question to both of you, if you had to choose between investing first in the movement development or in design, iconics and differentiation, where would you put the budget?
If your brand, Tom, indeed.
Yeah.
I was hoping you were going to go first there. The horrible answer is it depends what day of the week, where I'm going, what I'm doing, in terms of what I prioritize. Sometimes I want to wear a watch that's just interesting, and I'm in a group of people that want to hear about a hairspring or snail cam or one of these really, really niche topics. And sometimes I just want to wear a watch that isn't technically anything fantastic, but just design-wise is quite cool. So I'll collect vintage, like 90s Oakley watches and Issey Miyake and all this kind of old Swatch stuff, which is purely design. They've just got a battery in them and it's purely design. So both are really important to me, but it depends where you catch me and what I'm wearing the watch for.
Right.
Not really an answer.
If you were a brand, Andy, what would you invest in?
I think, you know, certainly where we've seen brands come in to fill the space is in that high-end mechanical movement focused. I mean, these days it's been about movements, but it's also been about finishing. And the educated collector desires and understands and looks for these things. Where there is opportunity in the bigger market and the collector market is for design focused watches. And we've seen, I mean, one has to only look at the success of Cartier, which at its core is a design focused brand. It has plenty of icons to draw on, but that is a design-focused watch. It's not about the movement, and they're the second biggest Swiss watch brand that exists. They've moved quite successfully in that space. There is desire for that. I mean, we look at newer brands like something like Dennison, designed by Emmanuel Guy. Fantastic watch, under 1,000 francs. That's a design-focused piece. They have, got the credibility within the watch enthusiast community and collectors, and are translating that into a more mainstream sales success. So there's room for both, but there's probably more room for interesting design pieces, I think, on a bigger scale.
I also find that we have, like over the last 2 decades, I mean, the term in-house production and in-house is so overused that there is actually no bad Swiss movement out there. So this raises the bar for anybody who wants to enter this market. On the other hand, I think we have seen independents who were actually going into, I would call it like design movements. They were designing, creating new functions. I mean, if you look at an Uhrwerk and what it actually shows on the display, it's more like space travel than like reading the time. And I feel that the direction is really to differentiate. It's more it will not be possible after Architektur and all these icons to create a new watch face. I mean, we have seen that actually even with Patek in some case, that it's really hard to say we have the new watch for the 21st century. And on the other hand, people are buying the brand then and say, actually, I don't care, I just want this piece. And on the other hand, we see that companies who really rethink what a watch can also be, like a piece of art on the wrist, which actually Hublot said like 20 years ago, which is so true. And it's also about reading time, but also about your personality, about your expression, and more an art piece brings in totally different approaches, material-wise or language-wise. And I find this merge of technical innovation and what is possible today with modern technology is so actually cool that it's not again about features. It's not about waterproofness. I mean, any smartwatch can dive now, is a dive computer. So it doesn't. You cannot only differentiate, even if it's nice to say it's 10,000 meters waterproof. But I mean, who cares? Do you care about features anymore in a watch?
Yeah, I definitely used to care about depth ratings. That was one of the things down the pub. You would say, "Oh, my watch can go 1,000 meters," and your friends would go 500 meters. You win. But yeah, I mean, it's a nice willy waving point, isn't it? It's like with all these silly cars, it's nice to know the car can go 200 miles an hour. And if you're spending that amount of money, you want to know that it can do something that is unnecessary, but not really anymore. I'm more into the design stuff.
And you were mentioning Cartier, which I found interesting, because what I like with Cartier is that they actually every year they are kind of flipping the coin. There's a new design that they actually had 100 years ago. And I wanted to ask you, because usually the rule would be consistency is king in watchmaking, but Cartier and also others are saying no, disruption is key. I need to disrupt myself, kind of. What would you say is more important?
Well, I think that's true, but I think at the same time, the recent success for Cartier under the previous CEO Cyril Vigneron, which was really actually paring down that collection and focusing it on those icons, the Tonk and others to, really have a pure sort of expression of what that brand was. And, that's the Rolex model. That's what you do to sort of find success. And then you can iterate on that. Once you have established that, then you can iterate, go back to your back catalog and do new things. And, Cartier, whereas I said before, they're not about the movement, they're about the design, and they are. But at the same time, every year they make some extraordinary pieces, whether it be, the mystery movement or whatever. They certainly have that watchmaking capability. But at the same time, it's interesting. Cartier, from a collector's perspective, recently ended their NSO program, which is a really important thing. That in terms of managing that supply, managing that uniqueness for their pieces. This is what it's all about in terms of keeping remaining desirable and collectible for collectors. But I also wanted to talk about, because you mentioned in-house movements. There's been a complete shift on that, right? 3, 4, 5 years ago, everybody had to say they were making an in-house movement. I think as collectors and watch consumers have gotten more educated, they realize that the Swiss industry is based on establishage and supplying components and parts to manufacturers, and they are certainly more open and willing to accept a movement made by a well-known movement manufacturer. It does not have to be in-house anymore. The market has progressed.
Maybe to come to a closing slowly, what I find interesting is also, because we have a lot of jewelers here, is also about the experience of getting to know a watch, of experience the piece in the store or in anything else. I just remember a German-based reseller like WamS. They are doing, I think, about 200 events a year. And I wanted to ask you what you think about being invited to a watch event where a new collection is seen, and how you would love to discover new pieces. What would be your ideal way? And then also you, you're owned by a retailer, but also what your strategy maybe is in saying, how do brands in the future interact with collectors? Or also the big difference between there's high-end collectors like you and there's newbies who have no idea of watches, who come into this crowd and don't understand the word. So maybe you can tell us what would be the ideal experience for you at a reseller's place.
I'm kind of, I straddle kind of media, press, and buyer. So I don't get the full customer experience. I don't get the full journalist experience. I don't get the full kind of influence experience, if you like. I kind of just get a mishmash of all of them. Some brands I have a purely customer relationship with, some I have a press relationship with, some I have a mix of both, sometimes I have a marketing relationship. So I guess my opinion on this is probably jaundiced now, but I appreciate the more informal settings. I like a brand dinner. I like just like a drinks thing at the boutique in an evening where you don't walk into a silent boutique and you have 7 sales staff staring at you, looking you up and down, wondering, is he here to steal something? Is he here to buy something? So I definitely appreciate the direction it's gone in as a customer. The fact is, it is informal. It's, as you mentioned, WhatsApp. There's lots of amazing collectors groups now, and they work with the brands that kind of host informal events. I set up London Watch Week last year with a good friend of mine, Justin Hast. I'm sure neither of you will have avoided him over the years. Good guy. And a lady called Lucy Cheesewright. So we're now doing that, and that's a very informal setting. Nobody feels like they're being sold to. It's just hands-on with the watches, and I think that's key. If a watch is behind a glass cabinet and you've kind of got someone staring at you and you have to ask to get it out and then they get the keys and all this kind of stuff, it puts a bit of a barrier in there. And I think people instantly know if a watch is for them if they get to fondle it and they kind of feel like they're in their own space.
I have one follow-up for that, but first you, Andy.
Yeah, no, I think the way that we all interact with and experience watches is changing. And I think one of the reasons that Watches of Switzerland acquired Hodinkee was in order to cultivate and interact with our community, right? And Hodinkee is about community, about people who share that passion for the kind of watches that we love. And so we're doing, more events, more in-person sort of stuff through Watches of Switzerland, but also through ourselves. And that's how we all, should experience watches, is find our tribe, find our people, and find people who have common interests and common likes and or dislikes, and talk about watches. That's what this is all about. That's why we're so lucky to do it. And it's about especially post-COVID, it's about in-person experience, right?
And it's the same experience in Swisswatches and our collectors events. The collectors want a selection. They want different pieces, and they don't want. Partly if you're fans of the brand, then you can meet the same watch in iterations. What we experience is like this. Also, when it comes to high values, that you want to feel the ease of experiences with people who can afford the same kind of piece, and that you really can openly discuss. And there's not a brand guy sitting on your back and saying, "Oh, you're criticizing the piece, and now I have to swipe you out of the waiting list," or whatever. I think this ease of experiences and handling it through, even with high values, makes the difference, the informality. So do you agree to that extent, that you want to also have the differentiation of different pieces and different watch brands in your hand in an evening? Or is it okay to say it's only this one brand and I go with that?
If I like the brand, I'm more than happy to go along. Yeah, by all means. I think actually sort of an evening where there's just one brand on the show, because otherwise you end up getting distracted. You end up getting pulled over on one side and fiddling with one watch for the evening and talking to a bunch of people, and you miss out on a whole load of other stuff. So I like to be quite focused. I like to just have one brand at a time that I can have space to kind of absorb, really get into the nitty-gritty of what they're about, get a loop out, have a little fiddle. That's me, though. Some people, I'm sure, is different.
Last question from my side to both of you. If you were launching a new watch brand in 2026, what would you absolutely not do?
Maybe I wouldn't launch a new watch brand in 2026. The industry is saturated with watch brands. The ability to make watches has never been easier, whether they're made in Switzerland, Japan, Germany, China, or elsewhere. However, what I would not do if I must be launching a new watch brand is, make it yet another dive watch that doesn't have a reason to exist, that doesn't have a story, that doesn't have a already sort of predetermined aspirational client base for me to sell to. As I say, yeah, you better have a good reason to launch a new watch brand.
I echo your point. I absolutely wouldn't be launching a watch brand. But if I did, the last thing I would do is try and pull the wool over anyone's eyes in terms of where the movement's from, any chinks in the armor in the backstory, anything like that, because we have sleuths now that will get you. There are a few, just even Instagram accounts that will dive into the history and they will rumble you if you've told porkies. We've seen some of the big brands fall foul of, relatively small Instagram accounts that gather traction like that, I won't mention any brands because they'll probably get annoyed about it, but we've all seen it happening. So you can't get away with guff anymore. Information goes so quickly online. So if I did launch a brand, it would have to be 100% airtight in my story, and it would have to bring something new to the table, which is impossible.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andy. I think now maybe we have some questions in the audience. I don't see too many still here, but is there any questions from the audience about watch collecting and the future and the brands? Well, then I would say we close this session. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you very
I think
much.
it was really interesting to dive into that and have to have both sides or like three aspects in watch collecting here and talking about the whole industry. I think we have so many brands in there. It would take a day to discover that. But I agree. Entering into the watch market in 2026 is really would be a big thing. And I think I agree. There is only the two ways. If you're starting now, you don't have the heritage. You could only go with hype and hope that somebody picks up. And that is also the wrong thing.
I think actually an honourable mention at this point, Toledano and Chan. They've come in with no real backstory, if you like.
Yeah.
Purely design. Technically wise, it's something that, can be done. And they've somehow done it. And I love their watches. I bought one. Yeah, I think that's one of the rare success stories. That's kind of... I don't know if it could be replicated.
Really. I mean, it has become so fragmented, the market, that I would say if you're going into the niche of the niche of the niche, there is still marketplaces because there's always those 500 people in the world that will probably buy it. If you can make a living out of that, fine. You can found a company. I would also not go with historical dead brands that have been not around for 100 years and start over and tell that we have a big heritage. I mean, that for sure doesn't make a sense. Some brands, there's sleeping giants out there, and we have mentioned some that are rising now. I see also, like we're talking now for 10 years about Breguet, now after 250 years, they seem to be back on stage. We have seen other brands like Vacheron that were always at the peak. They came down and now they're having a huge momentum. So there is no formula that even after almost 20 years of social media and digitalization would say now you have to do this. There is no recipe for success. But if you tell a true story, you can create a watch brand right away.
As you say, Tom, yeah, there has to be validity there. There has to be truthfulness, absolutely. But yeah.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye, INHORGENTA.